Hi, and welcome to this episode of Tales from the Trail. Justin Chezem of Christopher Newport University men's soccer and I welcome psychologist Mike Breske. Mike just finished up his internship with the University of Missouri Counseling Center Student Health and Well-Being on his way to earning his PhD in psychology. He is currently taking on a role with the Stanford University Athletic Department to work with their sports psychologists. We discuss the intersection of mental health and well-being in athletics. Mike brings the perspective of being a college soccer player before he began to study how to work with student athletes. I hope you find the discussion helpful and interesting. Please share the podcast, subscribe, and send me your questions and feedback through matchplayrecruit.com.
Yeah, so my favorite Shaw story, I don't know if this is like really reflective of Shaw, but it was definitely reflective of Shaw in the moment. We were playing do y'all still do the spring game against William & Mary, Cheese?
Yeah.
So
Weeks ago.
we were playing the spring game, and we had been kind of like toying around. Like I had typically been playing in the middle of the park, and we had kind of been toying around as we had some people leave that year. Actually, I was leaving that year too, but wanted to participate in the spring before taking off. And we've been toying around the idea with like putting me in a slightly more offensive role, like kind of a false nine almost, or like really pushing me up the field a little bit further because we were definitely thin in that part of the field. And it's like late in the game. We were either tied or maybe down one, and there's maybe like 20 minutes left, and I'm getting subbed back in, and they're putting me back in the middle of the field, and I go up to Shaw and I'm like, hey, like what are you looking for? Do you want me like pushing way up? Are we like going? Is this the time where we're trying to get numbers forward and like tie the game or get a goal? Or do you want me like kind of hanging out for a little bit and push up later? Like, what are you looking for, coach? And he's like, I want you to go in there and win the damn game. And I'm like, okay, like that's a good plan. I'm on board for that. But I'm like, that doesn't mean that. And she's like kind of walks over, and Shaw's doing it, and he's just like really into the game. He's like, I want you to get in there and win the damn game. And almost upset at the question. And she's kind of like tiptoes over and is like, hey, I think like probably sit a little bit and then start pushing, and like the next 5 minutes like gives me an actual answer to the question.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, good to know.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that one, Cheese.
Yeah, that's well, that specific one is in a pile of probably 1,000 that are very similar stories where I had to translate what Steve was saying to the guy, just so, hey, this is what he was saying. He does his walking off thing with his arms poked back and fired up and starts getting after somebody else. So yeah, that was the main job for 13 years for me, was translating Steve talk.
Yeah, Shaw translator, and to your credit, I think you got pretty good at it.
Yeah, I understood the language really well by the end there. But it was pretty good. I knew it was coming too by the end.
Who's translating your language now?
That's it.
I think Sean and I do a good job of kind of good cop, bad cop. He's so laid back. I mean, and he's very, very bright. Like, he knows the game significantly more than I do. I mean, I lean on him for a lot of tactical situations, and so I'll kind of like, hey, what are you thinking here? And he'll kind of talk to me, and then I get up and I get after kind of what he's saying. So, not that I don't have a mind of my own, or don't get me wrong there, but I lean on him a ton, and so I think it's a different type of relationship, more of a good cop, bad cop type deal.
So initially we were talking about the retired head coach at Christopher Newport University, and now we're speaking to the current head men's soccer coach at Christopher Newport University in Newport News, Justin Chezem. Cheese, welcome back. Obviously, you've been on a ton of these. And then I'm going to let you introduce Mike, because he used to play for you, and now he is on to doing exciting things with his life and his career. So maybe
Absolutely.
You guys can kind of catch up a little bit on here and give him a good intro.
Yeah. Mike Breske, fantastic alum, played during some of the best years we ever had at CNU, transferred over from Virginia Tech. He's actually a relative of our athletic director. So, he's got plenty of ties. Wait, is that right?
Basically,
Um,
Kyle was the best man at my older brother's wedding.
that's what it is.
Yep.
I think he refers to you as like his nephew, or he calls himself Uncle Kyle or something. But
Yeah.
very very invested in the school, and Mike's been a great alum, and we've connected a few times. We were groomsmen and fellow alum Noah Jefferson's wedding, so we spent some time together in DC, had some fun, and Mike's getting married this coming up soon, real soon,
That's
right?
right.
Really
Yeah, a
excited
little
about
too
that. Yeah,
soon.
I'll let Mike kind of take over and talk about his background and what he's doing now.
Yeah, so my and I have to give like some academic credit to Christopher Newport too. It's a great school. My academic experience there was really positive as well. Um, it was at CNU while I was playing that I figured out that I really wanted to stay around the game post college, stay around sports. So I went into uh, psychology. I once I graduated, finished my undergrad degree, I went to the University of Kansas to study sport and exercise psychology under Dr. Mary Fry. Um, then, in order to like be able to work with athletes directly, needed to get my license as a psychologist. So that is what I'm working towards right now. Currently an intern at the counseling center at the University of Missouri, where I'm doing my PhD, and will be heading out to work with the Stanford sports medicine team next year for a postdoc, which I'm very excited about. So that's what's coming up for me.
Cool. So you're relocating to Palo Alto?
I am.
Worst places in the world to be.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
you know I'm I still have mixed feelings about the so-called weather tax. We'll see what the cost of
Right.
living looks like, but excited to get out there in the sunshine.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, so tell us about your recruiting story. Where'd you grow up and how did you end up at Tech and then progress from there?
Yeah, my recruiting story is probably a little bit of a unique one. I'm a Blacksburg local, so I really was, I was attending Virginia Tech soccer camps, as a youngster and all throughout middle school and high school. Um, we ended up having a pretty good class of recruits coming up through our high school. Probably, gosh, I think probably like 6 to 8 within 2 years. My class and the class above me, we probably had 6 to 8 guys that were getting Division 1 looks, and uh, the Tech coaches I think had an interest. It was kind of in their own backyard, so they took over coaching our club team a little bit later in high school, and we got recruited directly off of that experience. So it's a little bit of a unique one, just that we were kind of in their backyard, so to speak. Uh, but I did think that like seeing the difference that other kids that I ended up playing with had in their recruiting experience really kind of taught me a lot about what was unique about mine, what sounds like a more typical experience. So I felt it was interesting.
And then you ended up at CNU.
And then I ended up at CNU. Yeah, so we had some coaching turnover at Virginia Tech at the time, and guys were kind of like moving in and out of the program. I felt like it was time for me to, actually for a moment there, I felt like it was time for me to hang it up. That freshman year was tough. The team wasn't playing well. Uh, we got along okay, but the performances on the field weren't there. We had a lot of roster issues. Um, so I was feeling pretty despondent at the end of that freshman year and felt like maybe it was time to hang it up. And I know one of the things we wanted to talk about today was kind of the intersection of mental health and college sports. And I would say that was kind of a first experience that I had with like how mental health can impact you as an athlete. I had such a underwhelming experience as a freshman that I was like, I don't want to play anymore. I'm done with soccer. I'll I'll sign up and play on like the club team or play intramurals and have a good time. Um, and then that turned out not really being the right move for me either. I was kind of just staying at Tech as a student and hanging out for about a year and a half before I was like, I really need the structure. It got to a point where I was like, I don't think I'm going to graduate if I don't have the structure that comes with sports and the support. So it was time for me to, look into transferring. And as Cheese mentioned, I had this connection. Kyle McMullen, the current head AD there, is a close friend of the family, and he was like doing his plug. Like I wasn't familiar with CNU throughout the high school recruiting process because mine was so unique. It was like pretty early on that I was like, okay, Tech sounds like a good fit. He was like, come check us out. So I came up for a weekend, and I think the guys were doing their like spring indoor season at the moment up in Williamsburg. So I went and played a game with them and met some of the guys and felt like it was a great place and going to be a good fit. So transferred there.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cheese, you got anything?
No, it was good having him. It was a good addition. I mean, like I said, the team was pretty loaded at that time, and he was able to factor in pretty quickly, right in the middle of the field. I was trying to think who was in the middle with you at the time.
I think it was me and Farmer a lot.
Farm.
Yeah, Farmer for the most part. Zim would get in there. Uh, Sean was in more of like a stopper role, but
Was a stopper then.
I mean, he was huge for us in the middle of the park. He really held us down defensively. It was awesome playing with those guys. Absolutely.
Yeah, some of those teams you were on are, I mean, some big runs, number one ranked in the country time, and Elite Eights. Yeah, you were on some pretty good teams then. That was a fun run. Fun run.
So you talked a little bit about kind of the intersection of sports and mental health, and everybody has their story. What kind of drove you to where you are, and was there an inspiration for that, so to speak? An occurrence or that kind of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. You all might not be aware of this, but in the psychology field, it's like often pretty understood that people get into specialties or whatever their interest is in psychology. They get into it because they have some kind of personal experience with it. So whether they had like a family member going through some mental health issues or have experienced some themselves, that is often what really draws people into the field. And sports was that for me. I had this, like I said, this not so great experience my freshman year, and then even getting back into things at CNU. I mean, she's I think is being a little generous there, like factoring in immediately. But it was an adjustment, being on a team again after a year or two not playing, being on a team again, getting fit again, getting my speed of play back up. It was an adjustment, and for so many of these athletes, and I know we kind of were chatting about this yesterday, Cheese. For so many of these collegiate athletes or these high level high school athletes, athletics is such a big part of their identity. If sport isn't going well, they feel like their life isn't going well. It doesn't matter if their grades are good, doesn't matter if their relationships are good, if their family is, supportive and they feel connected. If they're not playing well, it has a huge impact on their well-being because they are so identified with that athlete role. And I think that was true for me. And, anytime I didn't feel like I was performing my best on the field, it would really take a toll on my functioning everywhere else. So I think kind of my process of like growing into that and learning more about myself was what led me then to, want to help out athletes that had a similar experience to me.
Yeah. That's super common now. Are you noticing with that specifically, especially the big identity to athletics? Is it looking at male versus female? Are you seeing it more with men? Is that like, it's my experience. I've seen guys like they just they have to be doing well, they have to be winning, they have to be the guy, the successful one. And I'm sure that there are some stories on the female side, but it seems like most men are really drawn to that. Is that something you're experiencing?
Yeah, I think that's on the right track. I don't have specific numbers at the moment. Well, actually, I do. I was looking into this because the NCAA will do some of these like well-being surveys every once in a while, and they'll hit all three divisions. They usually get a pretty good response rate, but I think it's reflected in those numbers that like yeah, that on-field performance tends to have a bigger impact on the mental health of our male athletes.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not by a ton, but it's a little bit bigger for them than the women. And I think that has a lot to do with just how we're socializing men. You know, being competitive and being a winner can get rolled into that identity as a man.
Mm-hmm.
Can get so tightly interwoven with our identity as a man that we might feel some extra pressure to be performing well. So yeah, I think like theoretically, absolutely, I would imagine this is a big issue for men. And even beyond that, talking more about like that specific intersection of mental health and athletics. I mean, the stigma is still so high. I mean, we see that here. I've seen that at every school that I've been at. That you know, reaching out for help as an athlete is still so stigmatized by parents, often coaches, often other members of the staff. I don't want to generalize. Absolutely, there are good people out there that want to help their athletes, but
Sure.
we still have some way to go on reducing that stigma.
Well, and I asked that question specifically to tie it into the recruiting part.
Yeah.
I got a lot of female coach counterparts that I talk to all the time, and we compare the men's and women's recruiting process. And I'll talk to them about who I'm recruiting against, and kind of how many kids are involved. And it seems to be a little bit of a disconnect where a girl will say, "Yeah, I love these couple of schools. If it doesn't work out, I'm just going to still go to one of those schools." Or on the men's side, it seems like, no, I'm playing soccer, I'm playing whatever sport because I have to play. I'm going to play, and so I'll go to a completely different school that wasn't even on my radar in the first part, just so I can be on a roster and go play. It seems to be, I've encountered that. It seems to be a lot more. I used to coach on the girls' side a lot, and while there were plenty of girls that were like, no, I'm playing. They're good players. They wanted to play, and I respect that. I thought that was awesome. But it seemed to be more women specifically were like, no, I'm going to that school. If I'm not on the team, I'm still going to go to that school. And I just don't hear that as often on the men's side. If they're good enough to play, they're going. They're going to go play somewhere. And so I was curious if you're experiencing that at all. If there's any difference, between the two genders, just talking about that. I mean, I'm just curious with that.
Yeah. So same survey. I mean, I guess a little bit of credit to the NCAA here that they are kind of covering all this stuff when they reach out to athletes. But with like NIL and the transfer portal becoming more prominent, they
Mm-hmm.
start to look into factors that, for example, contribute to people being interested in transferring, and that is a gender difference that we see. Men will list playing time as a more significant factor in pursuing the transfer portal than women. So I think that kind of supports what you're saying there, Cheese. And again, I think it's easy for us to do the gender binary, when we're talking about this stuff, because obviously there are differences that we see. But I think what is important for us to talk about as people in college athletics is that it has a lot to do with how we're socializing men and women differently. Women, I think, are a little bit more academically motivated, tend to be. They tend to be like a little bit more into some of the relationships that they create through athletics. Like those are important parts of the experience of college athletics for them. And, men, I think often feel pretty limited. Like, if I'm not playing, if I'm not succeeding, if I'm not winning, then who am I? I think they really start to struggle with that identity piece.
So I just did a quick glance at the transfer portal, and right now there's 3,000 soccer men, and I looked at the women, and there's only 2,200. And I could be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure there's more women's teams than men's teams. So even percentage wise, it's more men are in the portal. And I'm thinking about when young men are sitting in my office, even if they're sitting right next to mom and dad or sibling or whatever, when you go to talk to them, they almost don't want to talk about anything else other than soccer. When am I going to play? What's my position? What's your style? I mean, I have to almost like pry out of them. Hey, what do you want to study? What's your grades? Let's talk about housing on campus. Let's talk about food. You're going to eat every day. Let's talk about all these things. And I've even had kids go like, "Oh yeah, what are the dorms like?" And I think that women are so much smarter. Where they're like, "I'm going to go to the school with the best dorms, the best food, and I love the location." I think that they're putting more emphasis on the other things that are involved and not just like how quickly can I score some goals for you. It's an interesting dynamic when you talk to coaches about what their recruiting meetings are like with players.
Yeah, and I think that can be, I don't want to say, I certainly don't want to say that that can be like a red flag necessarily,
Right.
but it's definitely something I think to pay attention to. If you're a parent with a child that's getting recruited and going on those meetings, or if you're a coach, trying to gauge different players that you're meeting during the recruiting process, um, the more like tunnel vision that those players have on athletics. I don't care what the dorms look like. I don't care what
Mm-hmm.
the academics are like. I don't care about this other stuff. I just want to get on the field and play and do well. The more focused on that they are, the more dependent their mental health is going to be on their athletic performance. Um,
Absolutely.
I think that's a dynamic. That's what we talk about. In my world, that we use the term identity foreclosure to talk about this. So, if the athletic identity is the most significant, the most important identity for a player, over and above different ones that they might have, like, who am I as a friend? Who am I as a son or a sibling? Who am I as a romantic partner? Who am I as a student? If those are getting minimized and who am I as an athlete is like over and above everything else, then you catch a couple bad breaks, you don't have the season you're wanting, and it can really, really affect your mental health. So, it's something that I think is worth noting during the recruiting process.
100%.
Yeah. So during the recruiting process, what are, as coaches, what are some of the questions that can be asked? What are some of the, the one that you just brought up, example of the behavior is obvious, but maybe it's not as evident. When you're sitting across from each other, what are some questions that could be asked to ascertain whether this person, this recruit, is just all in on sport and doesn't care about anything else? Kind of behavior.
Yeah, I think a lot of that's going to come from, I mean, just basic conversation. You're going to see kind of where they're going with stuff. I mean, I will bring up a lot of things that have nothing to do with the soccer field. I try to spend, if I got a kid in here that I love and he's with his family and I'm actively really getting after this kid, those meetings can sometimes take 2 or 3 hours. That's including the tour and walking around and all that fun stuff. But the first minimum 30 to 45 minutes of it, I don't even talk about the soccer field. I try not to at the best of my ability. And you'll see kids start to, whatever, I'll study biology. And then they're like, anyways, the field, they want to talk about that stuff. And I try to pull them out of that as quickly as I can, because I want to know the fit. I mean, the biggest question that I always ask kids, I asked your son, I've asked all the kids that I've ever talked to from the club that I try to help these kids locally. I always ask them, if you never play 1 second of soccer, are you going to be happy at that place? And a lot of them go like, "Oh, are you talking about like if I tear my leg and I'm never going to be able to play soccer again?" I say, "Yeah, that's one example." Or just what if I never play you? And they always kind of like, what do you mean you're never going to play me? It's like every school in the country has a bottom of their roster of these kids that aren't playing, and either they're going to get cut or they have to really fight their way into playing time. And it's almost like a never even occur to them that they could go somewhere and not be the man. Or the top player. And so it's interesting, and the biggest thing that we do, and I love that we do this because our retention rate and our graduation rate is fantastic, and it's because of all those the pre let's talk before we talk soccer. Let's make sure you're going to love this place, and I'll bring up things that are a factor. So I'll talk about classroom size, and there are kids that have been like, oh wait, 19. I'm like, yeah, man, you're going to have homework. You're going to have they're going to check attendance. You're going to have to know your teacher and interact in the classroom. And if that's not in your wheelhouse, then you need to go to a much bigger school and learn what their process is like. It's just this is what's going to be. They're going to know your name, and most of the kids are probably in the same boat that I was. Like we needed that extra attention. I wasn't a fantastic student, so but they did. Most of these kids don't even know that yet. And so once you start talking about these things, they really will start to they're bright kids, especially the kids we're recruiting are all close to 4.0s or above 4.0s now. So they're pretty bright kids, and they're like, oh yeah, maybe I do need to consider these other things. And you start talking about how much it's going to cost, and oh, now I got to have that tough conversation with my mom and dad about how am I going to pay for this. So you can usually pry it out of them just by talking about all the other factors involved at the school outside of the soccer field. And
Mm-hmm.
most of the kids, to their credit, are like, oh yeah, they start to interact, they start to ask questions, they start to follow up on things to get the wheels moving, and then they catch up. But as soon as we get to soccer, they're like dialed in again. They want to know. They want to know what their gear looks like. They want to know, oh, what are our cleats? Like they get excited about that. So
Yeah. Let's talk about more like just for a sec, more psychology as it applies to sports. Like um, maybe just provide like a quick overview of what that actually is, for people who aren't really that familiar with it, and then we can kind of get into it a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. So, sports psychology, I first and foremost, the thing to know about it is that it is growing and changing really rapidly right now. There are a lot of uh, different different professional organizations that have a stake in what sports psychology means, what that job really is. Um, and one of the big kind of dividing lines right now in the field is, who are the people that are focusing on mental health and who are the people that are focusing on performance and working on performance enhancement. Um, the qualifications for those don't always look the same, but sometimes you can be in a situation like a lot of schools now are trying to employ people with both skill sets, that have some experience with performance enhancement, but also can handle the mental health side of things. So that really is, I think, going to continue to be the movement. The NCAA is invested in student athlete mental health. It is becoming a very hot button issue. The more that we get the Kevin Loves and Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka's talking about mental health, the more the college athletes hear about that and start to care about it. And the NCAA has to serve that demand. So they've recently instituted a requirement that student athletes, it's in their constitution actually now for the first time, that students have access to mental health resources as part of participating on their team, whether that's in the athletic department or just at the university counseling center. So, they really care about the mental health. And of course, each individual athletic department is going to care about performance. At the end of the day, it is important for anybody thinking about playing college sports to know that athletic departments, especially at the Division I level, the Power Five level, are in the business of performing on the field. Um, and so performance enhancement, is an increasing priority for them. So you run into people that have both skill sets. And I think the interesting, I don't know, maybe debate is the best word. Debate that happens in the field right now is like, what's going to have the biggest impact on student athlete mental health, like student athlete outcomes? Is it giving them those performance enhancement services, helping them get better at their sport, right? Doing mental skills training, increasing resilience, that sort of thing? Or is it just, taking care of that basic mental health, dealing with the anxiety and depression that often come with just going to college for anybody that's college age and dealing with that transition.
Mm-hmm.
So, the field I think is really trying to address all those needs, but where any one person that identifies as a sports psychologist is focused might vary a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of crossover between mental health and performance, right? I mean, if you're not, if one side of the house isn't in order, then you're not going to perform well, right? So
Yeah.
it's probably makes sense. I'm not going to make an assessment of it. Never mind. Um, yeah. So, Cheese, you got. I see you leaning forward. You got some.
No, I'm taking notes. You know how these things go. It's Mike's saying something exciting. I'm like, oh yeah. Then I immediately go on a tangent.
Right.
I've got terrible memory now because of my 3 and 5 year old. So I just immediately just write stuff down so I don't lose track.
Yep.
I want to ask a question. So I'm a military brat. I grew up like rub dirt on it. You're all right. Don't cry. That tough love type environment. I grew up that way, and I was, this is anecdotal, but I think I got through it just fine. So what do you say to like the old school guys, the guys that are like, what is going on here? What's wrong with these kids? I've heard it. I've heard these old school guys say that, and they haven't probably been in the office with the kid that just walked in the door crying for something that's like, oh, okay, we need to deal with this. It has nothing to do with the soccer field. What do you say to them? What do you say to those guys? Like, why is it, whether it's becoming so much more important, or what's the biggest role that you have found that, mental health professionals like yourself are, man, this is what we're doing and this is what we're seeing. And this is why we are so important. I know you kind of alluded to a little bit, but, speaking on behalf of like telling an old school guy, like, this is what I am doing and this is why, we need to be in the office with you.
Yeah, yeah. That's a big part of really the job for folks that are working in the college setting is, there is a certain aspect of like, if you're coming into an athletic department, how can you explain what you are offering to coaches, to administrators, to players, and what somebody is really looking for, what somebody's going to respond to, is really going to vary. Sometimes you do get those coaches that are a little bit more, old school, and they're saying like, how are you going to help my kids perform better, right? They tend to be a little bit more performance oriented. How are you going to get my kids to perform better? How are we going to, mental toughness is the buzzword, right? How are we going to toughen these kids up? And, I don't think there's anything wrong with that per se, but we need to be really, really careful about how we are defining mental toughness and what we expect that to look like in a college age kid. Mental health issues among that age group are just consistently on the rise. We see that we've seen that increasing, especially as like social media use increases. So when we're talking about like, oh, the kids today, they're soft, right? You hear that all the time from those like more old school coaches.
Right.
And, I think it's important to remember that, our experience, even mine, even as recent, I graduated high school in 2008. And even my experience wasn't like inundated with the internet and social media and trying to present yourself like you are having the best time in the world all the time to your friends. It's a level of pressure that you know even I graduating in 2008 can't relate to. I didn't have that experience in high school. So I think that's important to keep in mind that, these kids are feeling, whether it's imagined or not, like we're from a different generation. It's easy for me to say to Cheese like, hey, don't you think it's dumb that people worry so much how they look on Facebook or Instagram? Like, yeah, we can all agree. But, we didn't grow up with it like the kids nowadays do. And so whether you feel like that pressure is imagined or not, what they're feeling is real. They're feeling that pressure. So, whether they're not performing in school or they're not, presenting the person that they want to present to their friends, like all of these things are having an increased impact on mental health. So, I think that's a big part of it, social media and internet use. Another part that I think is easy to get lost now that we're kind of coming out of it is the COVID pandemic. You know, the isolation that a lot of kids that are going to be entering the college ranks over the next couple of years, the isolation they experienced at really, really critical points in their development are gonna impact mental health. You know, we're seeing 1.5 to 2 times higher like mental health symptomology in college age students and athletes specifically than we did pre-pandemic. So that's definitely a big factor that I think is important to keep in mind. You know, and the ripple effect is going to be long lasting, right? We're going to be seeing this in many generations of recruiting, like many recruiting classes that are going to be coming for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I've noticed that every year there's more of it in some capacity, and I'm glad you brought up. Well, maybe I did the tough love aspect of things, and I was thinking of I'm not a huge UK basketball fan or anything, or John Calipari, but he said something that I'm like, man, that's really true. I forget, that was 4 or 5 years ago now, where he talked about making kids uncomfortable, like that's his primary job, and you've got to make practice as difficult as he can. These guys have to experience failure. And that word is so interesting nowadays because, I mean, I don't think kids are experiencing as much, built-in failure as we did growing up. I mean, kids aren't playing outside as much, I don't know. I know that when most kids come in and they start to experience this, they are having a much, much more difficult time. I mean, you said yourself when you checked into CNU, even coming from Virginia Tech, a D1 program, it was hard. You had to play catch up. You had to get fit. You had to like, oh, I can't just come in here and be the best player. And there are kids that can't. They don't understand. They're not reacting to that well. They're not used to failure and picking themselves up and dealing with adversity. And I'm not really sure why. I mean, I think there's great parents out there. There's great clubs. Jump into the soccer side of things where it should be there kind of organically. But it seems like once they're here, they're having a little bit more trouble dealing with the adversity and dealing with failure than we used to deal with as coaches. I mean, are you seeing that being a major issue?
Yeah. I think there's a couple things that I think about when I think about like kids and how they respond to failure or like developing that resilience to failure. And I'm certainly not here to criticize Calipari or the career that he's had. The results speak for themselves, but I think making kids uncomfortable, putting them in tough situations, that is important for developing mental skills. That's important for developing life skills. A failure is or mistakes are one of the best, if not the best, kind of learning tool that we have as human beings. I think the part that gets missed often is, are we giving kids the resources to deal with that failure, or are we just kind of leaving them on their own to figure out their own way of dealing with it?
That's fair.
Because when you leave people to their own devices to deal with something that they're really uncomfortable with, and they haven't been taught those coping skills, they're going to figure out something that might hurt them more than it helps. We're really not great as a species. I genuinely believe this. We're really not great as a species at just like naturally figuring out what is going to be best for us in the long term, right? So you see kids starting to turn to short-term coping mechanisms. They're not playing well on the field. Well, I'll just, I'll go get drunk this weekend, or whatever. I'm just going to like zone out and practice. I'm not getting my playing time. I'm not playing well. So I'm going to, just try and have fun with it. Just, fart around in practice. They're going to figure out a way to soothe themselves that might not be good for their goals long term. And I think that, that kind of goes back to that question of like, what does a sports psychologist really do? I think that's a big part of our role, is to, be that guide and helping them develop like, hey, I hear that you are having a hard time adjusting to college, that you're having a hard time dealing with, setbacks on your team. And it's really important that you acknowledge and validate that. And at the same time, like, let's talk about ways of dealing with that that are going to get you closer to the kind of, athlete you want to be, that's going to get you closer to the kind of life you want to live. um, if we're just making kids uncomfortable without giving them resources to deal with it, it's not a winning combination.
It's interesting you say that because talking about John Calipari. I mean, even here, a freshman will check in, and before that kid even takes a quiz or has any homework, I need him to help me win soccer games. And that's a big ask for someone that's been on campus for 13 days. It's bizarre to really think about it. Compared to the spring sports, they get an entire semester to get a kid acclimated to being a college student before they even play a game that matters. But for us, it's hey, I need you day one to help me win. And if a kid falls into that category where maybe they don't have those coping skills right away, maybe they aren't prepared or they haven't dealt with this much adversity or being this far down on the totem pole, and by the time they come to your office or they start to like, hey, I need some help here, we're already 10 games into the season. I've had to move on because I need to win to keep my job, and we got to make the tournament and all these things. And now this kid just burned through the first 2 months of his college career. He didn't play a lick. It's now worse. It's now worse off for that kid. So basically, I think my question is, before they even get to college, what are some things these kids can do on their own? Because, like you said, maybe they're not getting it at home. Maybe they're living in a great lifestyle where there's not a lot of adversity thrown at them, or maybe they're just the guy on their high school and club team where I'm building my attack around him. He's not going to get thrown with that much. What can kids do on their own to help that? I mean, is there any skills?
Mike, before you answer that,
Yeah,
include parents in your answer, please. Like, I
Perfect.
think that they play a huge role in that, obviously.
Mhm.
absolutely. Yeah, I think a big part of it on the mental side is just understanding that, like, we don't have a lot of control over the emotions that are going to come up for us in those situations, right? I think that is a big part of how adversity and those, like, maybe not so great coping skills that might get developed, that's how those problems can really compound. So making sure that parents, are telling their students, that coaches are telling their students, like, hey, if you are having some big feelings, and I know I know it's like kind of infantilizing to use a term like that, but I'm a big believer in it. If you're having some big feelings, like, it is not your job to make those go away. That is way too hard of an ask for most adults, much less a kid that is 17, 18, 19. So making sure that they know, like, you don't have to get rid of all the emotions, get rid of the pressure, get rid of the imposter feelings that you might experience. Your job is to stay focused on what you're supposed to do, and can you bring those feelings along with you, right? If you're feeling a lot of stress as you're adjusting to college, okay, you can be stressed. How can you set that to the side? How can you put that in your boot bag while you go out on the field for an hour and a half and, do your work for the day? And, you are welcome to feel stressed right after that, right? But can you focus on the task at hand? I think that is kind of a broad overview of what mental skills really are, in my opinion, that, you can get working on right away as a student athlete. Just kind of understanding that you're not a failure if you're having a hard time controlling the frustration that you feel as you adjust to a new situation, the sadness that you might feel, like being away from home, right? You're not less of a person if you struggle to adjust. And parents, I think, have a huge role in that, in preparing their kids for the transition to college, making sure that they know that that's a really normal experience. A lot of people have issues making that adjustment. It's a big change. And so I think a big part of that initial adjustment to college is just like the expectation that it's going to go really, really well. And so as much as kids can be prepared up front, like, hey, it might not, like, Cheese, going back to that question, like, hey, what are you going to do if I don't play you at all?
Mhm.
Kids have to think about that.
Yeah.
It would be irresponsible of us to not present that as a possibility to a potential college athlete. So I think that's a big part of it. I don't know. Hopefully that like starts to answer the question. Honestly, Scott, there's so many different answers to that question. That's just the first one that comes to mind for me. But that's definitely something worth continuing to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from an experience and an observational standpoint, I've just seen so many different ways that kids have been parented, and um, you know, that's really vital in how they handle the experience once they're away from home, right? I mean, uh, I'm sure I don't even know if there's do's and don'ts really, right? It's just kind of, what suits the situation for. Um, I don't even know if I'm getting to a question here. Just more of like a sense of like you can either set your kid up for success or failure based on just the general feel of how you parent, right?
Yeah.
If you don't,
Yeah, and well, I think this like that sort of adds, Scott, I think, to the important role that parents have, especially as kids leave the house.
Mhm.
You know, let let the coach challenge your kid.
Right,
Let teachers challenge your kid. Um, as a parent, I don't think it doesn't cost you anything, and it can only benefit the kid if you are that safe and supportive person in their life.
right,
Um, and that gets back again to that question of like resources. If kids don't have resources, they're not going to be able to deal with challenge and discomfort. And
right.
parents are such an important part of those resources.
Yeah,
So, when you start to run into parents that like are pushing kids like they're a coach, right? And we've all seen those parents on the sidelines. Um, I would encourage them to be willing to take that step back. Let the coaches do their job. Just be a supportive parent. Be there to validate your kid, normalize their experience.
yeah. Enjoy watching your kid do his or her thing, and
Yeah,
um, yeah, I think just not parenting out of fear of your child failing is pretty important. Um,
yeah. You will pass that right on. Kids are smart. They're sponges. They're gonna soak that up.
yep.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
Geez, you got anything?
Yeah,
There's so much to get into. So,
I've written down like 50 things. I am curious about a few. Like I think the biggest thing that we've kind of talked about, and Mike, is the fact that every story is different. I mean, I can have one kid come in to talk to me and about an issue, and then another kid comes in and talks about the exact same issue, but those two kids are so different. I have to treat each kid completely different. And I've got, of course, my own stories. I've had to take a kid into our counseling services place, and I remember this is kind of where I'm wondering, going back to the original thought here, is I remember sitting there waiting for this young man to go and meet with the counselor. And I just remember thinking to myself, that counselor does not know who he is, doesn't know anything about him. And I know this kid where he's not going to give this guy anything. He's going to just keep it all in. And I just like, man, there's got to be a way that I, as someone who already knows him, who loves him, who is so invested in him, who just wants him to be happy and graduate and do well, and regardless if he scores a goal or makes a save or not, I don't care. Just want the kid to live an awesome, fulfilling life and have a great experience while doing it here at Christopher Newport. And I'm just sitting there like, he doesn't even know this guy's name, and I guarantee he doesn't even care. And I bet you that happens so much. And it's going to take so long for that counselor to break through all those walls to get this kid to trust him. And by then he could be he could be graduating. What if this happens during his senior year? We're just going to, all right, let him go. That's such a tough thing. I mean, I've got to be able to have something where like, what can we do? There's got to be a relationship between, let's say, you and me, where I use you as the stopgap so I can talk to the kid. I mean, is that something that's kind of happening throughout the landscape? I mean, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah. So I think this can be a little bit of a common misconception about therapy. So, we've talked about like all of the factors that that are going on in a collegiate athletic setting. Like I said, kids are smart, they're sponges, they will soak up implicit messages, and they are surrounded by implicit messages that like you are only worth what you can do for us on the field. Or even, they might even feel some academic pressure. You're only worth the grade that you can earn. Right? And there are a lot of different areas on campus that are putting that kind of pressure. Like, hey, your self-worth equals goals, or your self-worth equals grades, or your self-worth equals the number of followers you have on social media. And I think that's what's so refreshing about the therapy space for a student, is that like it can actually be to the advantage of the student and the therapist that I don't know them. I'm one place on campus where a kid can walk in and be like, I know that you don't care. At the end of your day, when you go home, you don't care if I don't play well. You don't care if I am failing. Like, of course I care. I care about my students, but like, I'm not going to lose sleep if, you fail a test. I got tons of clients, right? And I think that actually can free the kid up to open up a little bit quicker to those people, because they only have to see me 1 hour a week. I'm not deciding on their playing time. I'm not grading any of their tests. I'm just here to listen and support you. And that level of like separation between a therapist and a student, I think it's really what makes therapy effective, is that like, I'm not a parent that is going to be distraught if you're not doing well. I'm just your therapist. I'm not expecting you to do well. I don't have a job if everybody does well all the time. So
Sure.
I think that can be a little bit of a misconception that it's hard for some kids to open up. It certainly is, but I think it can happen pretty quickly, because they understand that this is one place on campus where like my performance, whether it's academic or athletic or social, it just doesn't matter here. Hopefully that like helps out on that question. But she's like, to get to the point of your question, like, what can I do as a coach? You can set the kind of boundaries that you expect a kid to set, right? If they're supposed to leave school behind them when they cross over that sideline and get on the playing field, you can do that as a coach. Hey, this isn't practice. This isn't a game right now. I'm just here to listen and support you. Some of the things that you said about like loving the kid, wanting them to do well, wanting them to graduate, some kids I think really need to hear that explicitly from the people that are, that all the other things about the environment are telling them that their performance really matters. If you can have those moments to say like, hey, leave the field on the field now. We're in my office. This is not, you don't have to score goals in here. I'm just here to support you.
Right. No, that's.
So I think compartmentalizing in that way can be really helpful.
Sure. No, I think that's an awesome point you brought up about how, it's hard to say you don't care, but it's about the on the field, the in the classroom. None of that stuff matters. All your thought want to talk about is the exact moment that they're in right now. Let's break that down. That's an interesting way that you put it, but that I've never really thought of it that way. That's how I'm going to express it to my guys. It's like, this is a place where you can literally say anything at any time, and it's going to be just about that topic. And it's good to have someone it's such a good point. It's good to have someone you can go to that actually didn't know you 3 minutes ago. That's a good thing. Just, you can express yourself, and they're professional. They're going to help you, and they're going to care about that moment in the short term. And you can bring it back with you to the locker room and make the necessary adjustments that you feel like you need to make. And I never thought of it that way. I just remember sitting in the room going like, this guy doesn't actually care. Well, he does. It's a different care. Obviously, he can't care as much as I do. He just learned the kid's name 3 minutes ago. It's obvious that, but just never thought of it that way. It's a really, really good point. Really good point.
Yeah, and I think it's worth saying, going back to that like kind of separation between like performance enhancement and mental health. performance enhancement ends up being a big reason why a lot of kids get sent to a sports psychologist, right? Not playing well in the field. Let's see if we can get them in for some mental skills training, et cetera. I don't have data on this, but anecdotally, when I talk to colleagues or in my own experience, yeah, first 3 meetings, oh, I'm not playing well. Oh, we lost the match, blah, blah, blah. After that, mental health is going to come out one way or another. The kids, they want to talk about it. They all have stuff going on, and performance enhancement is a way to get in, but I think that speaks to their understanding of what the space is. If you're a coach and you're not playing well, go see this person, they're going to be like, okay, I guess I talk about sports in here. And in 2 weeks, that's going to melt away, and they're going to bring in what they really need to be talking about. That's just what that space creates. Coaches and parents, frankly, are often too close to the student to be able to create that kind of space. And so it takes therapists being able to take that step back and be the appropriate distance away that they feel like they really can talk about whatever they need to.
Yeah, I've actually just this past year had a kid. It was a year ago. Sorry, he was a freshman, and I was talking to him, and I was kind of like, "Man, is everything good?" He just seemed angry, and he said, he goes, "Look, you're my soccer coach. I will only come in here to discuss soccer. I'll only talk to my teachers to discuss. I will talk to family, whatever." I was like, "Oh, okay, I can wear that hat. I can just be a coach to you. I don't have to be an uncle or a big brother or father figure. That's fine." It's just interesting to hear that kid, and to the point about earlier where we're talking about how every single one of these kids is different, regardless if they're in the exact same situation as the kid next to them. You have to approach each kid so much differently, and that it took me a few months to pry that out of him, and I'm like, oh, that's why you don't talk to me about these things. That's okay, perfectly fine. But I had to ask the question and get it out of him, and it's super interesting topic. And how many layers does this have? I mean, let's talk about this for 7 years, and it won't be enough. I mean, it's like, what do they say about Northern Virginia? You go to the Smithsonian every day, you still can't see everything. It's just such an interesting topic and a super important one. I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, let's agree to do this again real soon, because I think there's a lot more to talk about.
Yeah. Happy to be here. Happy to come back. It's great chatting with you guys.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks to Mike and Cheese. I'm going to hit stop.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Trail. Thank you to Mike for the time and insights. Please share the podcast, subscribe, and send me your questions and feedback through matchplayrecruit.com. See you on the trail.